An interesting backstory.
I think it's important that everybody knows about the Wizard of Oz.
A professional with decades of experience in her field.
I'm a psychotherapist who works pretty much exclusively with law enforcement officers, as well as other first responders.
Strong opinions and a definite point of view.
What people see on the streets, this job, is not normal.
Brutally honest and funny.
When I get a call in the middle of the night and they've been drinking beer, they're normally crying over a relationship. When they're drinking Jack, they get on the phone and they start off with, "Hey babe."
She identifies problems, probes, pokes, and makes you think.
So if something happens to your family, which is truly your biggest fear, and you haven't thought about every single potential of what could go wrong, then you feel like you failed.
She has her own special style.
You're either part of the problem or part of the solution. Pick a side.
Welcome to StephTherapy911 with Stephanie Samuels.
So hello and welcome to StephTherapy911 with Stephanie Samuels. Today it is truly an honor to have the Mayor of Inglewood, Mayor James T. Butts, on my show today, and long history of public service. 19 years with the Inglewood Police Department, rising to Deputy Chief, and then going on to become Chief of the Santa Monica Police Department. And then, because that wasn't enough years, you decided to go over to LAX and continue your journey. And then have been reelected mayor twice. So I want to kind of look at your journey because it's fascinating in many ways. And you came on the job kind of through a different avenue, as far as, you know, I kind of mentioned very quickly, I don't believe in coincidences that our lives kind of go for whatever reason. And your journey was one that believe that you had wanted to be a basketball player and was supposed to have a scholarship that didn't work out because of an injury.
Well, actually, I had two goals. The primary goal was to become an attorney. I was 7 years old when I saw a news broadcast and it talked about a corporate attorney in 1960 making $370,000 a year. I said, I'm going to be a corporate attorney. My love and passion was basketball, and I said, it's that or a Los Angeles Laker. Those were my two goals. And I was always a very focused child, always very much into school. Got that from my father. He born in North Carolina, where your goals as a black male then was to be a sharecropper like your parents, or you would work in the sawmill in Wilmington, and that was your career path. He didn't want that. He scored the highest on the standardized test back in the school district, and he finished first. He ended up going to college back east, left and joined the Air Force. Electronics was his MOS. And then he met my mother in Portland when he was stationed there, and they moved to Los Angeles. And he wanted to become an engineer, electronics engineer. And so he would go to the library 5 days a week because he couldn't afford the books, and he would take my brother and I with him. And so I was in the library from like 6 o'clock to 9, 4 or 5 days a week, and all you can do in the library is read. That had a massive impact, I think, on my scholastic ability. And things were going along. I got my scholarship for academics and basketball, had the knee surgery, 2 knee surgeries, and someone gave my mother a classified ad from the Herald Examiner about a community service officer position in the city of Inglewood, a civilian non-sworn position that was federally funded to recruit minorities into law enforcement. And so when I came to Inglewood, there were only 3 African Americans on the department. And by the time I was hired, I was the 7th. And so said, the retirement looks pretty good here. I'll stay here, retire and become an attorney when I'm 50, because you could leave when you're 50. And so one thing turned to another. Soon I was the second in command of the department. Took the test in Santa Monica and Pasadena just for the experience, hoping to be the chief in Inglewood. Was accepted both places and a finalist in both places, and was hired in the city of Santa Monica as the first African-American chief. Did 15 years there. We were massively successful, and then did 5 years in charge of counterterrorism and public safety for the Los Angeles World Airport System as an assistant general manager. And then in 2010, I ran for mayor, and I'm in the middle of my third term.
Why politics?
Say it again.
Why politics?
Actually, the last thing I ever intended to be was an elected official, because my experience with elected officials were they pandered to the person that was in front of them. But I chose to run for mayor in Inglewood because the Police Officers Association approached me and said the city was in dire financial straits, that there was a consideration to dissolve the department and go to the sheriff's department, and the mayor was stepping down due to a conflict of interest charge. And so, I felt that I owed the city of Inglewood, and I ran. It was the most difficult thing I ever did, was to run for public office. I ran in 4 elections, 2 for the temporary seat, 2 for the permanent seat in the same year. That's unheard of. And I finished second in every race except for the runoff for the permanent mayor seat. And that's when all the work started. I learned the depth of the city's financial problems.
Why was it the most difficult thing that you had done?
Because up to that point, I was always judged on the things that I had done or could do for the employer that was interviewing me. And I developed a track record. In running for elected office, it's name recognition and familiarity that are the key. And so although I'd been in Inglewood for 19 years, I had been gone for 20 years. And so I was running against an incumbent who was born and raised in Inglewood, went to school in Inglewood, had been a councilman for 16 years. And so I had to overcome that innate advantage. And it took, going door to door, walking door to door for a year, going to 3 church services every Sunday. And finally, my message got through, and I won the race that counted, the runoff for permanent mayor.
So the new buzzword, which is an old theory, is resiliency. So when we look at law enforcement and everybody's doing resiliency training and all of that good stuff, and yet I've seen no greater population that has greater resiliency than that in law enforcement. Where did you learn? And resiliency is only acquired by having had many bad days and striving them. People that are pampered pets are not resilient. They do very poorly when dealing with adversity, controversy, or what have you. And we're not wired for that. I don't believe that we're born, that some people are just better wired. I truly believe it is a fortitude that occurs in the survival instinct. So you talk about being 7, you talk about your parents, you talk about your dad, clearly had a tremendous influence on you. Period of time in the country where African Americans, it was very difficult. And yet he showed you that you need to be able to work hard, that you can be anything you want to be if you do so. Having both parents in your life, I assume, also played a significant role in a family. So you come on the job, one of a few African Americans, and you continue to move up the ranks. The resiliency component for you, where did it come from?
Okay, well, first of all, my father left.
Sorry, I didn't understand.
My father left North Carolina. Wait, hold on one second.
I love it. Hello, Siri.
Yes, my father left North Carolina because he didn't want his sons to grow up in the segregated racist South. But I didn't know that because, I just born here in Los Angeles. He also set an example of dedication, persistence, being goal oriented. And I think those are the nurturing ingredients of resiliency. You don't start off saying, oh, I'm going to be a resilient person. No, it's born of habits. And then when you need to be resilient, you have this reservoir of traits and characteristics to fall back to. Absolutely. And you don't even realize that. And so I believe that my ability to overcome, remember when I came to Inglewood, it was going through the throes of white flight. The first whites moved in the 60s. Whites had covenants on their homes that said you couldn't sell to a colored person. And then the department was 95, 96% white when I joined it. And that's one of the reasons they entered into the community service officer program to attract minorities. And so, yeah, I got good experience at being resilient, but it was born of the traits that have been nurtured throughout my life. Being focused, being dedicated. I had gotten my MBA along the way. I got my master's while I was chief of police in Santa Monica. And all those things come together, that police background, the command presence that I learned, the interpersonal skills that I developed in being a street police officer, and then the leadership dynamic that I developed as I came up through the ranks and was a chief of police. All those things together made me the right person at the right time at a dire period in the history of the city of Inglewood.
What was your worst day on the job and why?
Worst day of the job?
As a police officer.
Well, the most dangerous days on the job was being shot at the Gills Cleaner hostage robbery situation, having my windshield blown out at the Broadway Federal Bank pursuit, being shot at and having my headlights shot out at the Pioneer Chicken robbery at Manchester and Crenshaw. Those I would say were the most physically dangerous and worst days physically, but I would say spiritually was the racist environment that I was exposed to becoming a police officer here. And the worst thing about it was that my peers didn't even realize the depth of their own racism. And so that's where you had to be resilient, because if you responded aggressively, you create a self-fulfilling prophecy that you're the bad person that they impute you to be. And so you have to be more sophisticated interpersonally, and my work spoke for itself. And I would say now some of those gentlemen that were the most oppressive are some of my greatest friends as we look back through the lens of time.
What was your best day on the job?
Oh my goodness, my best day on the job. There are so many. I mean, I would say the best day on the job for me, because I was able to achieve fairly rapidly. I wanted to hold the door open for others that were disregarded, sometimes unconsciously, because of their sex, their gender, because of their race, and that were not thought of when it came time for promotional opportunities, that were not thought of when it came time for mentoring opportunities. And I'm proud to say that, I have been the progenitor of 10 chiefs of police that came up under me. Now, that's an amazing figure for someone whose largest department that they commanded was about 400 officers, and that was the LAX police. Santa Monica was about 216 officers. Inglewood was about 207 when I left. And I have made more chiefs of police, or had them come up under me, than any chief in the county of Los Angeles. I'm very proud of that because they're all, both races, both genders, all races. And so the leadership dynamic and cultures that I've cultivated in the organizations that I've run have now spread out to other places. I'm proud of that.
Was your dad alive? Is your dad still alive? And was he able to see you become chief?
My dad was alive and able to see me become chief, and he would send pictures of myself and Bill Clinton and George Bush back to his family in North Carolina. Yeah, he was very proud. He didn't see me become mayor, but he did see me become chief.
Nice. The responsibility to the African American community for you goes all the way back. Today, I actually read something about that you hired convicted felons. And that is something that is near and dear to my heart. I worked down on the Lower East Side of Manhattan and was able to deal with GED programs and I used to say to them that there are two ways off the day. You can leave in a body bag with a toe tag, or you can educate. And was able to work with food and beverage at Madison Square Garden. I know you have a history with MSB. To be able to get them internships in food and merchandise. And that lots of issues with union stuff or what have you, but really became quite beneficial, very moving, probably one of the things that I look back in my career and things I've accomplished. That was incredible. For you, what, after they were they hired full time? Was it internship? Because just kind of amazing to go back and if you could share your thought process on doing what you did.
Well, it goes deeper than that. When I became a captain of police, I was the individual that said we need to hire Latinos into the police department. We didn't have Latins, we didn't have a lot of women, and that was one of my gifts, I think, to the police department, was to increase the diversity from just male blacks and male whites in the Inglewood Police Department. When I came to Santa Monica, we ended up making the first female sergeants, lieutenants, captains, and of course I've had a female chief come out of Santa Monica underneath me, and another female chief that went back east. And so it's more than just blacks that are offended. But what my 37 years in law enforcement made all too clear to me was that when you're branded with a felony conviction in this country, you're written off. You're screened out in employment. You can't vote. You become non-existent. And that's really not right. What's the point of ever letting anyone out of prison if they can't live, if they can't feed a family, if they can't care for themselves, if they're pushed into the cycle of reoffending because they have no hope? And so you link that in with my experience in Inglewood showed me when the forum was here and the racetrack was going, that Inglewood was a vibrant city. When the Lakers and the Kings departed for Staples Center in 1999, when the racetrack, off-track betting cut their crowds from 43,000 a day to less than 1,000, and then Inglewood sank, it was very clear to me that you needed entertainment and high-end retail for a city to survive the fluctuations in the economy. And so, but there's no point in having sports, entertainment, and a vibrant economy if the people that live here are pushed aside and don't participate. And so one of the moral imperatives for me is a 35% local hire goal with all of the development agreements for our major builders and developers here. And what that has done, along with our hard to employ provision, which means people that have offended, has resulted in, like I said, on these jobs, no less than 100 convicted felons making somewhere between $60 and $90 an hour. But more importantly, learning a trade that will transition them on to other construction jobs. And so we're very proud of that. Our unemployment rate dropped from 17.5% when I came here, one of the highest in the country, to 4.7% pre-pandemic, which is the lowest unemployment rate for a minority majority community in the United States of America. And we're very proud of that.
Incredible. The we were funded, the GED programs were funded by the juvenile justice system. So everybody had already had a record by the time that they were hired. And there was a funny story. There was some merchandise missing at Madison Square Garden. Of course, first place they're going to look is going to be somebody who already has a history or whatever. So I addressed it with him. He's great. He says to me, he goes, listen, I'm a drug dealer. He goes, I'm not a thief. He's like,
He's a businessman, not a thief. I got it.
but you know what? There is truth to that. They don't typically, if they stay in their lane when it comes to kind of their expertise and whatever got them into trouble. And he was
Drug dealers are business people with an illegal product.
And gang members are just people in unions that haven't figured out how to perfect another trade.
Well, there's a little bit different because gang members, because they're socialized by gangs on the streets with a different culture and ethos, they end up with pathological behaviors that are totally inconsistent with being a productive member of society. And so big difference.
Yeah. It's when I talked about kind of, my background's, very much at this point with really working with law enforcement. I spent a lot of time riding with doing ride-alongs in Los Angeles in the 80s. So during the rise of the gangs. And one of the things that really kind of ruminated when I compare the two, because certainly that ethos and stuff is very different, is that sense of wanting to belong to a family, that sense
absolutely
of somebody having your back no matter what. That really is the part that ruminated with me between that. And, when you look at the profile of a cop is typically somebody who has grown up in crisis, does well in crisis, doesn't know how to live without crisis, somebody who has issues with a father figure, a significant loss early in life, somebody who has history of abuse, emotional, physical, sexual, and neglect. Certainly not all cops, but when you look at that, with the vast number of law enforcement that I've seen, that, at some point in time, they had to make a right-hand turn or a left-hand turn.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'd have to tell you that's true with some. They're in every life. No, excuse me. In every subset of people, there's a smaller subset of people that end up being pushed into making a choice. I don't think that that's ubiquitous, but I do think that that's a valid concept. And there are some people that they either make great cops or great gang members. And the question was, how would they be socialized when they grow up? And so I agree with that. And in fact, I hired a young man when I was a captain in the Inglewood Police Department who his family was in a gang in East Pasadena, and he wanted to become a police officer. And the chief there called me because they said, we can't hire him here because of his family, not because of his gang involvement. And I hired him. And when I came back here as the mayor, he was a sergeant, and he just retired just recently. So I can tell you that there's living proof of that.
I love that. I also love that. And I love being able to not be perfect. That you're allowed to have a past. Obviously, depending on the gravity of the past. But you're somebody who has been able to see beyond, which a lot of people don't. That you've taken, people would say, more risk than other people.
Well, a shortcoming of people that tend to be successful is what I call I've got mine syndrome. They think that because of where they are, that they are superior. And I that totally was not my experience, because I grew up, with significant a culture that was very discriminatory. And I kept a sense of myself, and I had this trait you call resiliency that was born of my dedication and commitment. And it allowed me to achieve, excel, but not forget where I came from, not forget the pain of discrimination, not forget what it's like to be an outsider. And so I developed organizational cultures that are inclusive, that are based upon people's commitment to their jobs.
One of the things that I found working on the D, Nutbutt City, was trying to get, so his large population was Puerto Rican, is trying to get the minorities that had made it off the dig, out of the project, back in to mentor or to talk to others. And what you're talking about really just ruminated, because one of the things that we found was the attitude of, I figured it out, they can. And yet kind of this moral responsibility that I too feel about being able to help others, about being able to go back, to be able to lift people up that are struggling. And that was something for you, when you talk about being inclusive, when you talk about being an outsider. The other part is you're very humble. What people don't know is you were ever so kind very quickly to me, saying, love to be interviewed by you. When can you do it? Let's do it soon. And you availed yourself. Just the humility of a man that has gone and risen in both rank and politically, to truly avail yourself to a woman that you had no idea existed 2 weeks ago. And yet, I'm not the exception to the rule. As a matter of fact, I believe that I'm your norm. That you are this man who says, hey, this sounds great. This sounds like it'd be a wonderful thing. Let me hear it. Let me think about it. I also found that successful people will return emails quickly. They just, there don't seem to be a whole lot of downtime. And I know whether it be January 1st when your assistant called me back, or last night at whatever hour, again, and that's been my experience. There's no, hey, I'm the 9 to 5 mayor. I'm the therapist that's, works from, 10 to 7. It's that if you're going to truly do this, it's part of who you are. It's soul. It's not a job. It's not even a career anymore. It's
an avocation. Well, it's funny when you talk about trades now. Right now, because of COVID, since Thanksgiving, I've put the city on a modified schedule where we minimize the number of people that come into the office. Because out here in California, LA County in particular, Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, the numbers have gone through the roof. Infections and deaths. There's an infection every 6 seconds. And so it does no good to have everybody at work if you risk mass infection. And so we've structured things so that we've minimized the people in each workplace. And you may come in 1 day a week, and then you have 4 at home where you telecommute, and we spread it around. And that's thinking about people. People are important. And so everything that you talk about, that you observed about me, I'm a service-oriented person. So while I'm waiting for your Zoom call, 5300 rings. That's the public line for the mayor's office. Well, the lady that's supposed to be here today, she's getting her COVID test right now. Well, I can't let the phone go, and so I'm answering, and the lady wants to know who comes to pick up her dead cat. And I said, well, there's LA County Animal Control. I said, I don't have the number, but they have a website. And so, I mean, that's what I am, a service-oriented person. And I believe that organizations operate in the shadow of the leader. People know that for me, customer service and interpersonal deportment are the bedrock of your relationship with the people that you give service to. And so I try to model, I know I do, I model the behaviors that I expect of others.
There are very few leaders anymore. There are supervisors, there are high-ranking officials, but there are truly very few leaders. I remember one of my officers who's retired military and still on the job. His I think it was his lieutenant came up to him and he said, you know, I am your leader. You need to blah blah blah. And he said, no, sir. You're my supervisor. He said, leaders lead. He said, in the military, he said, I oversaw a large group of young men and women. He said, I knew their first name. I knew their last name. I knew the dates that were important to them. I knew their families. And he said to the lieutenant, he said, I've taken the same day off for 24 years while I've been on the job. Sir, what day do I take off? I've been under your command for almost a decade. No clue. And he said, my wife's name, my children. He said, sir, you are my supervisor and I respect you for that, but please don't ever call yourself a leader. Taught me so much so quickly.
Well, I have a very simple litmus test. When I would promote people, I would tell them, remember this, that power and authority exists around you, through you, but it is not resident within you. And you will know if you were a leader or just a manager by the way that people treat you when you no longer have power over them and what they want, and when you no longer can do things for them. And that is something I found to be extremely accurate. When I left law enforcement after 37 years and went to run for public office, I set up a campaign office, and I had no volunteers because, you know, people here, they knew the incumbent. He was the incumbent interim mayor, and he had been a councilman. And officers from Inglewood, Santa Monica, and LA International Airport came, and they were my volunteers. Civilians from those organizations came and volunteered for me. Now, I could do nothing for them at that point, but that's when you know that you were a good leader.
So, like with every career, every public office doesn't come without controversy, doesn't come without the public. So one of the things that I had found was about a violation of Miranda rights.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens when you do your job well, you do your job right, and yet things don't always work out quite the way we planned?
Well, you know, one of the things that you have to remember is that the things that end up being headline making don't always have the subtle nuances of what occurred. And so let's talk about that Miranda case. That was a case where detectives from Los Angeles and a detective sergeant and homicide investigator in Inglewood had a practice of giving someone their Miranda rights. And then after they invoked their right to remain silent, saying, well, okay, that's fine, and we can't use it against you, but tell us what happened, okay? And what the trick was is that they couldn't use the statements against them, but if they took the stand, they could use their statements made outside Miranda to impeach them. And in this case, it was a gentleman who had murdered a woman, and they used his statements after the invocation of Miranda to impeach him, and he was convicted of murder. And so that was appealed, and in that appeal, they name, of course, the chiefs of police. Now, did I know they were doing that? No. Was it illegal? No. In fact, it was an advisory bulletin from a deputy DA in Orange County named DeVallis Rutledge, who had sent about a training bulletin that had been given to the officers that I was not aware of. And so, but of course I'm the chief, so I get named.
Right.
That happens. If you're the boss, you end up being responsible and you end up getting named. So if your skin is that thick, you don't need to be the leader of a police department.
What are you seeing the differences now in policing? Because that certainly is a hot.
Oh my goodness. Well, first of all, what I see is that departments are being run the way that I ran departments when I came to authority. Okay. Shooting policies are being changed. The use of canines are being restricted. Their departments are taking internal affairs investigations seriously, as opposed to mere prophylactics to give the appearance of self-inspection. That's what's changed. And the biggest progenitor of change across the country was the advent of cell phone technology, when they put cameras and video in cell phones. Period. That's the difference.
You and I think very, very similar on this. And one of the spirited conversations I've had with people has been when they get the cell phone footage and they now become a resident expert on what happened. And I say to them, do you go around with your cell phone on 24/7? No. We typically turn on our cell phones after something has happened.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you get. What role do you find the media is having, and what's their responsibility in what's going on in this country right now in law enforcement?
I don't really hold the media accountable to the degree that some would. The reality is that social media has preempted broadcast and print journalism to the degree that they are always scrambling to keep up, and they don't even do the limited investigation that they should be doing before they package some stories. Now, I will fault the broadcast media for that, but the reality is that the world has changed dramatically with the advent of Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, because people get things instantly. So the media doesn't have the overarching ability to shape public opinion that it once did.
That immediate gratification,
Mm-hmm.
which is all the way around.
Mm-hmm.
So now we hire in law enforcement young kids that have grown up on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and all the other social medias that are used to immediate gratification. How does one train that out of somebody or deal with it? Because it's a different law enforcement culture that right now are the rookies.
No, actually, the people coming in have different expectations. They prize their time off more than the officers from my generation. They are more technologically astute. However, and I will say this because it's been proven here in the city of Inglewood, the fact of the matter is that people assimilate into the culture of the organization that they inhabit. If that culture is one that resonates throughout the organization, that it is based in fairness and fundamental principles of fundamental right and wrong, and that you spend a lot of time training them in the techniques and tactics of their jobs, that the organization is a serious organization. And so I think it transcends the generation of the person that inhabits it, because the reality is that you employ people, you pay them a good wage, you provide them with examples of leadership, and if you have developed a positive culture, then you will have a good organization. And we've proven that here.
Great. That's where that leader comes from.
Absolutely. And our chief of police, his name is Mark Fraterata. He's the best chief that we've had in the city of Inglewood. I know that. And I was his first sergeant when he came out of the academy, in fact.
Awesome. Tell me about the Clippers. Tell me about the Rams. Tell me about kind of this crown jewel that you were able to get. And
Well, you know, as I said, when I left Inglewood, we had the Lakers, the Kings, hockey. We had the Forum did about 70 concerts a year. The racetrack did about 43,000 people, on average 6 days a week. We had a Sizzler, a Norm's, and the Big Donut. When I came back, we had the Sizzler and the Big Donut. That was it.
Big Donut's still there.
Big Donut is ubiquitous, and so we also had a $18 million structural deficit. We're down to our last $11 million in the bank, and I took office February 1st of 2011, and by September, October, we would not have made payroll. And so the first thing I did was try to get the Forum back open, and Madison Square Garden and the city came to terms, and they renovated the Forum. We gave them an $18 million rehabilitation loan from our redevelopment agency. They put in another close to $100 million, and people said no one will ever come to Inglewood for concerts again. Too much crime, too much poverty, undesirable place. Within 2 years, it was the #1 concert venue in the state of California, #2 in the country, #3 in the world for attendance. That attracted.
How do you do that?
How do you do that?
Yeah, those are just words right now. You accomplished something that clearly nobody thought you could. How do you do that?
You contact the principals. You contact a lot of principals. I talked to Mark Davis of the Raiders. I talked to Irving Azoff. I've talked to Jim Dolan. I talked to a lot of people. But, you know, everyone doesn't yield fruit. The Raiders didn't happen because you need three things to get an NFL team. You have to have an owner who wants to be here, which we did. The owner has to have the money to build a stadium, which he did not. And then you have to have a vote of 75% of the owners in the league to allow them to move. And he did not have that. And so that didn't work out, but the Forum did. Now, what the Forum going live did was there was a development across the street called Hollywood Park Land Company that was financed by Stockbridge Capital that had an approved plan to build a modest retail and dining component, 2,500 residential units, some office space, and 4 public parks. And that had stalled because of the recession and the housing market crash. And it was so they were about to bankrupt that LLC. Well, when the Forum opened, they got investors and they were going to finish their project. Shortly after that, within a year, we met with Stan Kroenke, who was looking to move from St. Louis. And then we had a discussion about this being the across the street from the Forum, the largest contiguous block of open land in Southern California. And we came to a plan that ended up coming to fruition that had him going to a joint venture with Hollywood Park Land Company and expanding on their project for more retail and dining, for greater office space, a 300-key hotel, 6,000 seat performing arts theater, 70,000 seat NFL stadium. And that came to fruition. And then a year later, after the vote of the NFL was done in 2016 to allow the Rams to migrate here, the Chargers wanted to join them a year later. And then 6 months after that, we came to terms with the Los Angeles Clippers, Steve Ballmer, to explore an exclusive negotiations agreement to build an 18,000-seat NBA arena across the street with another component of retail, dining, and 200,000 square feet of open space. And all those things now are in progress. At the same time, I negotiated with the LA Philharmonic to move their youth orchestra program here to the city of Inglewood to an old security bank building that we purchased years ago that's across 50 yards away from City Hall. And so that's in progress right now, and it'll open probably in late 2021. And we're going to have some of the finest orchestra musicians in the world tutor and mentor children here in the art of orchestra. And a certain component of those will be Inglewood children. So, one thing begets another. And so we're past the point of critical mass. In fact, in the history of sports, there's only 3 cities that have obtained 3 professional sports franchises. And that's Los Angeles, San Francisco, and New York. We've done the same thing here in Inglewood, but we're 9 square miles, and what took them a generation, we accomplished in 2.5 years. So I would say it's a combination of things. Some people would say that we're lucky, and I say no, that fortune favors the prepared. And I believe that my education in business gave me the perspective to understand how business people think so that you can develop win-wins. I believe that my experience as a law enforcement leader and manager gives me an edge in leading an organization that is service-oriented, that instead of being typical civil service, municipally oriented, is externally oriented so that we attract the things that will make life better for our residents.
Your business background was incredibly valuable, I think, all the way through, whether it be on law enforcement or politics. Why business?
Why business? Because I was told that if you wanted to become an attorney, a business major was what you would get as your undergraduate. And so I got my bachelor's in business administration. Then I went into law enforcement, and I got my master's after I was a chief in Santa Monica.
You chose never to go on for a law degree. Any regrets on that?
Oh, not a bit. Lawyers spend 80% of their time preparing for trials that they hope will never happen, that they will be settled. And I've had so much of a more fulfilling life in my years in law enforcement and my years as mayor. I have no regrets whatsoever.
What impact has COVID had? I mean, obviously, tremendous. You're undergoing this amazing renovation, as well as building to have these professional teams, and yet potential of not having people filling that.
Okay, so let's talk about the totality of it. Right now, Inglewood is going through a development renaissance that has never been experienced in a medium-sized city like this. We have a 221-unit apartment and first floor retail development going up in the downtown area. Across the street from that, we have 144 luxury apartments going up. 3 blocks away from that, we have condominiums that are going from $800,000 to $1.5 million that just open and are selling like hotcakes. We have the SoFi project, which is a stadium, but it still has other components that are being built right now. Then we'll have the Clippers arena being built, and we'll have the LA Phil which is still in progress. Now think about this. When you build things, you're not making any money. You have your performance set up to account for the time that you're building. And so right now, even though no one can go anywhere, the only place that we're losing is the Rams, SoFi Stadium Chargers and the Rams, because we don't have ticket revenue from there. So we can live with that because along the way, I've saved money and we don't have to lay anybody off. We don't have to put people on furloughs, and we could go this way for another year to 18 months. And so I know that we've been prepared. And so what may look like good fortune to some is actually primarily the result of our preparation and execution of strategy.
Inglewood is now being, what are they saying, gendified? What's the terminology, the proper terminology? Huh?
Any what? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Any concerns about minorities, about pricing them out of Inglewood?
I want you to listen to how you have been programmed to posit that situation. Okay, so gentrification is a process whereby people that have greater economic means sociologically come and inhabit an area that was formerly undesirable, and because they renovate properties and upgrade the value of those properties in that neighborhood, the people that once could afford to live there can't live there anymore. That's not what's happening in Inglewood. In Inglewood, we had a shift in demographics from completely white. Inglewood, from 1922 to 1937, was the Southern California headquarters for the Ku Klux Klan. It was a white community. And in the 60s, blacks started to move in and whites started to move out. And then we came to the point where the community was 55% black and probably 40% white and 10% Hispanic and others. We've evolved to the point where the city is now 52% Hispanic, about 47% white, and 47% black, 3% white and others. Now, before, Inglewood was not a desirable place for diversity, and people wouldn't come here because of the crime, because of the condition of the streets, because of the condition of the schools. And so what we have done, we have redone more lane miles of roadway and linear square feet of sidewalk and reconstruction in the last 5 years than the prior 30 years combined. We have cut the crime rate to its lowest point ever in the recorded history of crime in the city. In fact, we have now property values that have increased about 225% since the end of 2012. So what does that mean? That means that people that before would never consider Inglewood a place to come because of the low property values, because of the crime, they'll consider Inglewood because now property in Inglewood is a bargain. And so here's the question I ask people when they give me that gentrification argument. So you have 3 engineers working for Northrop. They all make $135,000 a year, and they all buy in Inglewood. One is black, one is Hispanic, and one is white. Which one gentrifies the neighborhood? They all do,
right?
Because they make more money. And so, what all that I can do, you can't doom a city to be second class forever and say that you're doing something good because you allow high crime, because you allow miserable quality of life conditions, that you allow property values to forever be nothing. You're not doing anything for anybody. But what you can do is you can bring jobs. You can have a 35% local hire goal, and you can institute rent control as we have with a 3% cap per year, so that the people that live here now will be part of that 35% local hire goal. And that's what you can do. But I just don't buy the whole thing about you're doing someone a disservice when you improve the quality of life in their community.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And that gentrification was not meant in what appears to be
Mm-hmm.
the form that you were talking about. And you're spot on. And I think that people want to live in a safe location, period.
They deserve to.
I mean, exactly, exactly. And the fact that what you've done has given people quality of life, and that's what it's about. Is
Mhm.
is phenomenal, and you've actually done so your entire career, from
Absolutely.
being a police officer and understanding from the inside out, and then being able to make such a huge difference and impact.
Well, as a chief in Santa Monica, we cut the crime rate 64%. By the time I left, I was chief there 15 years, longest serving chief in the history of the city. The only year that crime was higher was 1956, and that was the year they started keeping crime statistics. When I got to the airport, we went from being the worst rated in aviation security for category X airport in the country to number one by the time that I left. And so we have continued the culture of excellence right on here and back into the city of Inglewood.
I feel that if we task people, with a certain standard, that people rise to it. It's
Mhm.
when we don't set a standard that they don't, and then we blame them for the failure. When I truly believe it's the leaders that have failed.
Mhm.
When I was dealing with the Lower East Side, I remember giving them Macbeth, and one of the guys comes to me and goes, "This is not on the GED," and I'm like, "You're right." I said, "I don't want to know how little you're going to know. I want to know how much you can know." And I watched them rise. I watched them live up to an expectation that they now had from somebody, rather than the opposite. I always say I got schooled on the D. They taught me more about life than any other location so far has. And I think you've done the same. I think you have set a very high standard, one that you live by. You are
Mhm.
not telling anybody to do anything that you're not doing.
Absolutely.
Whether it's answering emails on a Sunday at 10, or getting to work at the crack of dawn, none of that is beneath you, above you, or what have you. And
Mhm.
people will gravitate.
I heard it called shadow of the leader. People operate, if you're a true leader, people will operate within the shadow of the leader because 80% of the people that work for you, they want to achieve.
Mhm.
They want to achieve. They just want to know, I call it the northbound train, and they want to know which direction is northbound.
Yes. And they want to make sure that the person that's telling them that it's northbound isn't just pointing, that they're walking in the same direction.
They won't pay any attention to you if you don't model what you say.
Yep. So it's been my argument when I asked to fly, and I always asked to sit in the emergency aisle, and a woman says to me on the phone, she says, you have to be prepared to do A, B, and C. And I'm like, I know, it's good. I'm like, I'm the first one off the plane. She's like, oh, no, no, no. You have to open up the door for everybody else. I'm like, lady, people are sheep. If I'm not out that plane, nobody else is going. She said, probably a good point. Didn't hear that from me. But that's what leaders do. That's what leaders do. So as we wrap up, what is it that you want to be remembered for?
Oh, I want to be remembered as someone who uplifted the careers of people that worked around him, that made the communities better that he was a part of, and as somebody that cared.
Is there a question that I didn't ask, or something that you wanted to share?
Oh goodness, no, you asked everything.
Thank you. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your humility. Thank you for your time. Thank you for choosing the careers that you chose, and for making the world a better place. I truly mean that. It was an absolute honor to have you on today.
I thank you very much for interviewing me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.